All right, everybody, we're here at the lovely Derby Market. Best place in town to get refreshments. As I know you guys have heard before, we are heading to do a soil test. Let's get this going. All right, everybody, we're at the site. We do not have a key for this lock. We have been told we can lift the gate off the hinges. So we're gonna pop this one off the hinges, kind of pack it around, and we're gonna head up this lovely driveway in which you guys will be able to make your own dictations in regards to if concrete trucks are needed atop this hill. So let's pop this gate off, head up the hill. Go. And just so everyone knows, that was not a time lapse. That was real speed. It takes a lot to get up that hill without having to put your vehicle in four-wheel drive. You can see it there. Pretty good slope all the way down. Jack is headed up the hill on the mini excavator. You can see him there. We've got the four corners of this potential home marked out. And this individual is wanting their septic system to be tested over there in that brush somewhere. So I'm going to instruct Jack as to where he needs to go, and we will do another soil test. So everyone seemed to find it very educational. Each dirt testing is different, and let's see how this goes. You can see there's a lot of roots in there, which is obvious. Bunch of trees. Trees everywhere. But one thing that I mentioned earlier is every site is different. Jack and I believe we're not going to have to worry about a fragipan here, but we do believe we're going to have to worry about bedrock and some clay layers that'll be potentially catastrophic to this potential system. However, the test hole is digging out pretty well. You can see the dirt is nice and loose. Obviously, I am not a professional. Jack is, and he will give us his feelings as to what he thinks about this test hole, and we'll go from there. All right, everybody, we're down here in the dirt with the soil expert. As I mentioned earlier, Jack is on site. We're performing another soil test, and this one's coming out a little bit different. If you guys remember from the previous video, we had a fragipan at a specific depth, which ensured the requirement for a specific system. This site here has a fragipan, and the site is large enough for a different style of system, but yet we need to confine the field bed enough for potential expansion later. And we are probably going to install a Presby system here as well. And one thing to mention is there are 3 test holes, one on the other side of that excavator, one here where Jack is standing, and then a 3rd test hole over there. This test hole did not have a fragipan, but this test hole that Jack is in now does have a fragipan. And with all that being said, Jack, Mr. Expert, as I've mentioned on a previous video and again today, what do you think about this dirt, sir?
Good morning, Matt. Folks, I'll talk about the fragipan Matt's alluded to. In the previous video, we talked about color, texture, and structure and how that affected the soil. Now here we've got an example of something that's rather dramatic. When we talk about the color, we've got these nice brown colors again, and if you recall, that means we've got good drainage because the iron in the soil is oxidized and we get these nice brownish colors. We also have nice, what we referenced as structure. That's the way the soil breaks up into chunks, like that right there. Texture, I'll mention that again, that's silty clay loam. We talked about that before. Now what we've got here is down here where the screwdriver is, we have a layer that does not have that good structure. That's in a massive layer with a few cracks down through it. We call prismatic structure. And if you notice, the roots even peter out, start disappearing at this level. Even the roots can't penetrate that level. So what that tells us is water's not going through it very well, and so we have to design our septic system to account for that. Now at this spot, that fragipan is starting at 42 inches. That means we have to come a little shallower, put in a little different system. That's where Matt and the health department figure that out. But the reason they're doing something different is because that water won't get through the 42-inch layer very quickly. The previous hole didn't have one. We're going to look at hole number 3 and see what it's got. But at this point, our limiting layer for this area is 42-inch fragipan.
And something I want to allude to is when Jack says the water won't penetrate the limiting layer very quickly, that top layer that has that more fine structure, medium body, it's going to flow vertical until it hits that gray area, which he's calling the fragipan or limiting layer. And then as he stated, it has small cracks. What that point does is it turns the water more horizontal and it starts running with grade wherever that layer's at. Jack stated 42 inches. Over here, it might be 50 inches, but that water is going to stay mainly on top of that gray area and flow downward, opposed to a straight down absorption, which is why Matt and the health department need to know about that fragipan so we can put the proper system above it and have enough depth of earth for the deposits we put into our septic tank. Solid stay in the tank, water comes down out of the tank, and that dark water, that's what we're going to call it today, absorbs into that top layer, and the goal is for that to be absorbed prior to it reaching the fragipan or limiting layer. Otherwise, that bad water, if you will, could end up coming out of the hillside down there somewhere if that limiting layer comes out of the hillside. So we want to make sure all that gets absorbed in this area where we put the field bed and doesn't escape anywhere else. You want to pull a chunk of that limiting layer out of there. You showed them the medium body structure to that top layer of soil.
Yeah, Matt. Now this is called a fragipan for a reason. Once you break it out, out of the ground, it breaks apart easily. It's fragile. Hence the name fragipan. Another colloquial name for it is hardpan. But once you break it out, it'll break up. Unfortunately, in the soil, it doesn't act that way. It doesn't break up into these chunks.
Stays tighter.
It's much tighter.
Okay.
So that's why it's called a fragipan.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, folks, that's another soil education. As some of the last comments stated, a lot of people call it dirt. It's soil. I'm no professional. I call it dirt too. But I want to mention another thing here. This is going to be a potential 3-bedroom system for the home that's roped off up there that I showed you guys. So here in our county, a 3-bedroom system requires 1,000 square feet of field bed. The Presby system requires a minimum of 70 feet of pipe per bedroom. We have 3 bedrooms in this potential home, so we've got to have 3 times 70, 270 feet of pipe. And what that turns into in this location, because of the 4 corners that we have, if you will, of this field bed, we always want a longer bed than we have in width. Long and skinny is preferred on these systems. So what we're going to do is we will quote installing a 62-foot field bed in this area, and Jack has performed the digging of the test holes to show the health department the outer extremities, if you will. That's going to be the far end. This is going to be the starting end, because the tank is going to enter in on this corner, not the tank, but the pipe. The pipe that comes from the tank is going to enter into the field bed here. And this allows the health department to understand furthest point, midpoint, starting point, if you will, which gives them 3 areas to look at that dirt and say, yes, I approve of everything that this dirt is telling us for this type of system. Here's our requirements for Perry County, Indiana, and we need you, the contractor, being Dirt Perfect, we need you to uphold these standards for that system to ensure that we don't have any of that dirty water escaping the earth and it's absorbing properly. Jack, is there anything else you want to mention, sir, before we let our people ask questions and or make comments? Sorry about that, folks. I got stuck in a greenbrier here. That felt great.
No, if there's questions, I'm ready.
All right, everybody. Another part of this soil test is quoting an ICF Foundation, also the potential for an ICF home, also the potential for some excavation work, as this potential customer wants this elevation to continue out and through the house and then through the porch. The porch isn't as big of a deal as the house is. And with that elevation being the set point, he's wanting an area on the back side of these 4 stakes in which he can put a patio. So we know the elevation here is roughly 4 to 4.5 feet, which is 3 courses of ICF, which would be a crawl space. He does not want a basement. From there, above that crawl space would be 1, potentially 2 levels of ICF. So what I've got a quote for DP is bringing this elevation all the way across this hillside over to that big tree on that corner, hoping that we don't have to take it out. And then we've got to create a flat spot here and then lay this heel back and try to get that same pitch to be consistent down to that flat spot on the back side of this home, and hopefully carry the water to the opposite side, the north end of the property, because there's a natural drainage over there. You can kind of see it. So what we have got to figure out is, do we push the house forward a little bit? Do we pull the house back a little bit? Or will it work to ensure that elevation across all of this potential? You can kind of see where there's a berm here of spoils where we have trenched in the electric line. You can kind of see it coming through. There's some water in the ditch there. So that part of the job is complete. We have to move, or not move, but we have to work around this transformer back here that the power company installed. That's the furthest away from the building they would allow it to be. But all that hillside is going to have to be pitched. As we walk over here to this other corner, you'll be able to see the elevation change The biggest concern is how does it end up? You can see how much elevation difference we have over there. So this hillside's going to get pulled in, this hillside's going to get pulled back, and the ultimate question is, can we leave the tree or do we have to take the tree? That will be determined once we get that established, that box established. And if we push the house forward just a little bit, not a whole lot, but maybe more in line with that shagbark hickory tree over there, I think that'll be helpful for this flat spot. We won't have to take as much hillside out in the downward direction because of the elevation change. But we are going to go back to the office and we are going to run some numbers, kind of try to figure out the amount of dirt and hope that there isn't a whole bunch of great big rocks, which is always an outlier. And to kind of speak to that a little bit, when it comes to outliers that is under the dirt, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict what we're going to find when we start digging. So I always tell the customers, here's an estimate for providing you what you define as what you want. If we do hit structures under that top layer that we cannot assume, you'll be our first call. We'll call you, we'll stop work, we'll have you run out to the site, look at it, and we'll make an executive decision together. Because this is a big cliff ledge. It's not vertical drops in through here, but there are rocks. You can see we've peeled out some pretty decent rocks in that ditch. So the hope is that we start excavating all that out and we don't hit any great big obstructions. But if we do, we obviously have ways to solve those problems, but now you're talking different equipment and time. So I always like to tell customers, we run across it, we'll talk about the potential time and the potential cost difference, and we'll make a decision. We can back up and punt, and we can leave it at that higher elevation, or we can always take more out, assuming that it's not an actual, let's just assume the Titanic's in there, right? It's kind of hard to take out the entire Titanic, but we will be able to do a lot of things with rock, hammers, rippers, things like that. So we do have the ability to take care of those problems. It just depends on how much money at that point in time the customer does want to spend on a project that was quoted at a lesser amount. So as always, like, comment, and subscribe. We will let you all know if this ends up being a job for DP and M&R excavation.